The Winters' lakeside mansion hadn't changed since I was a child. The same imported marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers, reflecting generations of old money and carefully curated prestige. Family portraits lined the grand staircase, a visual timeline of wealth, influence, and belonging. I wasn't in any of them. My name is Eliza Winters, though at gatherings I'm simply introduced as Charlotte's daughter, or more often, with uncomfortable pauses and vague hand gestures. I'm 34 now, but to them, I'll always be the black sheep who rejected the family's financial industry pipeline to waste time on what they called glorified house flipping. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Today's annual Family Financial Summit had been called at my grandmother's estate on Lake Michigan, supposedly to discuss inheritance planning and investment strategies. What they didn't know was that the exclusive Lakefront Towers development, the crown jewel of Chicago real estate that my cousin Bradley had been pursuing for years, was already under new ownership. Mine. I sat near the back of my grandmother's sunroom, dressed simply in dark jeans and a cream sweater, watching as Uncle Richard, the self-appointed family financial guardian, clicked through his portfolio presentation. His voice carried that distinctive Winters condescension, the tone that suggested anyone with less than 8 figures in their investment accounts wasn't worth acknowledging. "The market has been volatile," he announced, adjusting his gold cufflinks, "but the Winters portfolio remains strong. Those who followed my guidance have seen exceptional returns." His eyes flickered toward me momentarily, a reminder of my decision to cash out my trust fund 5 years ago, a move the family considered financial suicide. What they didn't know was that I'd turned that money into Horizon Properties, a company that was quietly revolutionizing mixed-income housing across the Midwest. My cousin Bradley, freshly promoted to partner at his father's investment firm, nodded vigorously. "The family office has outperformed the market again. We've maintained our position as leaders in the financial sector." He paused, shooting me a smug look. "Some of us, anyway." If only they knew that the prestigious Lakefront Towers development, the one Bradley had spent 3 years trying to acquire for the family portfolio, now belonged to Horizon Properties through a series of calculated investments and strategic partnerships with local community development corporations. "The real estate segment is dragging," my older sister Vanessa commented, barely looking up from her diamond-encrusted watch. "Too unpredictable. Too much exposure to middle-class volatility. We should minimize our holdings in that sector." I bit the inside of my cheek to stop from laughing. Real estate, when approached with vision rather than greed, was transforming neighborhoods and lives, while generating returns that would make their jaws drop. Under Horizon, we'd pioneered a model that created affordable housing alongside luxury units, with community ownership structures that built wealth for residents rather than extracting it. "Something amusing, Eliza?" Uncle Richard asked sharply, his gaze cutting across the room. The family turned as one, like a practiced chorus, to stare at me. The room tensed. Even my grandmother, seated regally at the head of the gathering, raised an eyebrow. "Just considering alternatives," I said evenly, my voice calmer than I felt. Uncle Richard scoffed. "Alternatives from you? The one who walked away from a guaranteed position at Winters Capital to play landlord?" The dismissiveness was so familiar, it almost felt comfortable. They had no idea what I'd built, and that was by design. 5 years ago, I declined the position of junior analyst at the family firm, a role created to keep me visible, but powerless. It came with a prestigious title, an impressive salary, and zero opportunity to question the family's approach to wealth. I would have spent decades nodding obediently in meetings while they continued investing in developments that displaced communities and deepened inequality. Instead, I liquidated my trust fund, a decision that caused my mother to take to her bed for 3 days, and founded Horizon Properties. We started small, focusing on abandoned properties in struggling neighborhoods. Properties the Winters family would never look at twice. I do have some insights on the real estate market, I offered, knowing exactly what would follow. Bradley chuckled, the sound practiced and hollow. Insights? From flipping houses in those neighborhoods? This is Winters' capital, Eliza. We manage billions in assets. Leave the serious investments to those of us who didn't abandon their financial education. I almost smiled. My house flipping had evolved into Horizon Properties Group, a company valued at over $800 million. Our headquarters occupied the entire top floor of the Palmer Building downtown. The small office Uncle Richard had once visited was just our community outreach center, a calculated move to maintain the family's perception of my hobby business. My mother, seated quietly beside my grandmother, shifted uncomfortably. She'd divorced my father when I was 10, returning to the Winters fold with her 2 daughters in tow. She'd spent the years since then trying to prove we belonged. Eliza's company has been quite successful with some smaller developments, she offered tentatively. Perhaps we should hear her thoughts. Successful? Uncle Richard laughed. Charlotte, your daughter is playing developer while the rest of us build and protect real wealth. She's throwing away her potential on a vanity project. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That word, vanity, always hit a nerve. I'd heard it when I studied urban planning, instead of finance, when I worked in community development instead of banking, when I chose purpose over prestige. My sister Vanessa let out a dramatic sigh. Can we move on? The caterers will be here in an hour for grandmother's birthday dinner. I glanced at my watch. 20 minutes until my COO would be calling with confirmation that the Lakefront Towers acquisition had formally closed. The property that Bradley had been pursuing relentlessly would officially belong to Horizon Properties before the birthday cake was served. The real estate market isn't the problem, I said, meeting Uncle Richard's eyes directly. Your approach to it is. You're losing opportunities because you're looking at neighborhoods as extraction points rather than communities to invest in. Uncle Richard's face darkened. I've managed this family's real estate investments for 30 years. We invest in premium properties in premium locations. That strategy has built generational wealth. I thought of my grandfather, whose original real estate philosophy had been about creating homes and communities, not just assets. He would have understood what I was trying to do. And that, I said quietly, is why you're missing the biggest opportunities on the market. The world changed. Your strategy didn't. The room grew tense. Even my grandmother, who rarely showed emotion, straightened in her chair. The Winters family investments are failing to capitalize on the biggest market. Shifts because you're too comfortable to adapt, I continued, my voice low but firm. There's a revolution happening in urban development and you're on the wrong side of it. Enough, Uncle Richard barked, his face flushing. You lost the right to criticize this family's financial decisions the day you cashed out your trust to play poverty tourist in those neighborhoods. You're poor by choice, and that makes your opinion worthless to this family. Poor. The word hung in the air like a physical thing. I'd heard it whispered at family gatherings whenever I arrived in my practical car, wearing clothes without designer, labels. Poor Eliza throwing away her birthright. Poor Eliza, slumming it with the real estate gimmicks. Poor Eliza, who could have had everything. Before I could respond, the sunroom doors opened. Grandmother's assistant, Margaret, always composed, looked flustered as she approached. "Excuse me, Mrs. Winters," she said, addressing my grandmother directly. "There's an urgent call from Mr. Harrington at the Chicago Business Journal. He's requesting a comment on the Lakefront Towers acquisition. Apparently, Horizon Properties has just announced they've purchased the entire development." The silence that followed was absolute. Bradley dropped his leather portfolio notebook onto the marble floor with a slap that echoed through the room. Vanessa's mimosa glass tipped over, orange liquid spreading across the antique table. Uncle Richard stood frozen, his presentation clicker suspended mid-air. "Horizon Properties?" my grandmother asked, her voice sharp as she turned to me. "But isn't that—" "Mine," I finished, rising to my feet. "Though we're now Horizon Community Development Group, a company specializing in mixed-income urban revitalization projects across the Midwest." The silence deepened as I walked to the front of the room and connected my phone to the presentation screen. There it was, the Horizon website, with my photo under founder and CEO, our portfolio of properties, and the announcement of our acquisition of Lakefront Towers, the development that had been the focus of my cousin's career for the past 3 years. "That's not possible," Bradley said hoarsely, finally finding his voice. "Lakefront Towers is a $350 million development. You flip houses in poor neighborhoods." I smiled slightly. Those poor neighborhoods were the foundation. They taught me what communities actually need, not what financial analysts think they want. Horizon now manages over $2 billion in real estate assets across 5 states. Uncle Richard's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "You can't have Lakefront Towers. Bradley has been working on that acquisition for years. It's meant to be the centerpiece of the next Winters portfolio expansion." "It was undervalued because you were looking at it the wrong way," I replied evenly. "The development struggled because it was conceived as a luxury-only enclave in a diverse area. Our model incorporates mixed-income housing, community-owned commercial spaces, and resident ownership options that make the numbers work for everyone." "This is absurd," Vanessa said, dabbing at the spilled mimosa with a monogrammed napkin. "What happens to the luxury units?" "They'll still exist," I explained. "But alongside workforce housing and community spaces, the development will finally reach its potential because it will serve the actual neighborhood, not just an imagined wealthy clientele." Uncle Richard slammed his hand against the table. "You can't do this. We're family." I couldn't help but laugh. "Was it family when you called me poor for choosing a different path? When you dismissed every idea I brought to the table as naive idealism? When you mocked my work while I was building something that's now beyond your reach?" My mother stared at me, her expression a mixture of shock and something that might have been pride. "Eliza, please. Let's discuss this privately. I'm sure we can find a solution that works for everyone." I met her eyes steadily. "We could have had this conversation years ago. You could have visited my office, seen our projects, understood what I was building instead of accepting Uncle Richard's dismissal of my work. But you made your choices. You all did." Margaret hovered nervously in the doorway. "Ms. Winters, the reporter is still holding. He's asking about your plans to convert 30% of the units to affordable housing while maintaining the property's luxury appeal." Bradley slumped into a chair, the fight draining from him. 30% affordable? The profit margins will collapse." I smiled. "Actually, our model increases overall returns by nearly 20%. When you create genuine community value, financial value follows. It's the lesson this family never learned." My grandmother, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. Her voice, though soft with age, still commanded attention. "Eliza, you've kept secrets from your family." I turned to face her directly. "I learned from the best, grandmother. This family has always valued results over intentions, so I delivered results first." Her eyes, sharp despite her 90 years, assessed me with new interest. "And now you own Lakefront Towers, the property Bradley has pursued for years." "Horizon owns it," I corrected, "along with 15 other major developments across the Midwest. We're not just a real estate company. We're changing how urban development works." "Margaret," my grandmother said after a moment, "tell the reporter. We'll provide a statement later today." She turned back to me. It seems we have family matters to discuss first. The gathering had shifted irreversibly. The power dynamics that had been in place my entire life, Uncle Richard at the top, followed by his children, with my mother and her daughters perpetually proving our worth, had suddenly tilted. I was no longer the poor relation who had thrown away her birthright. I was the CEO who had just acquired the development they couldn't reach. "We should move to the dining room," my grandmother suggested, her voice betraying nothing of her thoughts. "The financial discussion can continue after dinner." "Actually," I said, checking my phone as a notification came through, "I'll need to step out briefly. The mayor is calling about our community benefit agreement for Lakefront Towers." Uncle Richard's head snapped up. "You already have a meeting with the mayor?" "We've been working with the city for months," I replied. "Our development model aligns with their affordable housing goals. The mayor has been enthusiastically supportive." I stepped into the hallway to take the call, aware of the shocked silence behind me. Through the partially open door, I heard Bradley's angry whisper to his father, "How did we miss this? How did Eliza of all people outmaneuver us on Lakefront Towers?" Uncle Richard's response was too low to hear clearly, but his tone conveyed a mixture of anger and disbelief. When I returned to the sunroom, the atmosphere had changed from shocked silence to tense calculation. My family members were on their phones, undoubtedly researching Horizon properties and trying to understand how they had missed my company's rise. "Eliza," my grandmother said as I entered, "perhaps you should tell us about this company of yours. It seems there's much we don't know." I took a deep breath. This was the moment I had both dreaded and anticipated for years. Horizon began 5 years ago with a simple premise. Real estate development should serve communities, not just investors. We started with abandoned properties in South Shore, renovating them with local contractors, creating affordable housing with ownership, pathways, and establishing community-owned commercial spaces. "But that's charity work," Bradley interrupted. "Those neighborhoods don't generate real returns." "Our first-year ROI was 22%, I replied calmly. "When you genuinely address community needs, the financial returns follow. We reinvested those profits into larger projects, each one building on the success of the last." "And now you have Lakefront Towers," my grandmother observed. "Now we have Lakefront Towers," I confirmed, "which will become the showcase for our development model, luxury and affordable units side by side, with community ownership structures that build wealth for residents rather than extracting it." Uncle Richard's expression had shifted from shock to calculation. "This is an interesting approach, Eliza. Perhaps there's room for collaboration between Horizon and Winters Capital." I smiled slightly, recognizing the familiar pattern. "When they couldn't beat you, the Winters family tried to absorb you." Horizon operates on principles that are fundamentally different from the Winters investment philosophy. We prioritize community wealth creation alongside investor returns. I'm not sure the two approaches are compatible. "Don't be hasty," Uncle Richard said, his tone suddenly conciliatory. "Family is family. We should discuss potential synergies." "Was it family?" I asked quietly. "When you called me poor 10 minutes ago? When you dismissed my work as a vanity project? When you said my opinion was worthless?" The room fell silent again. Margaret appeared at the doorway once more. "Dinner is served in the main dining room," she announced, providing a welcome interruption to the tension. As the family rose to move to dinner, my phone rang again. It was Maya, my CFO, confirming that the Lakefront Towers acquisition had officially closed. The development that Bradley had pursued for years, the property that was supposed to cement his reputation in the family business, was now irrevocably part of Horizon's portfolio. "Everything went through smoothly," Maya reported. "The press release is scheduled to go out in 15 minutes. "Perfect," I replied, aware of my family's eyes on me. "Let's proceed as planned. And Maya?" Make sure the community benefits agreement is highlighted prominently. That's what makes this acquisition truly valuable. As I ended the call, my mother approached, her expression a complex mixture of confusion and cautious pride. Eliza, why didn't you tell me about any of this? About how successful your company had become? I met her gaze steadily. Would you have believed me? Or would you have accepted Uncle Richard's assessment that I was just playing at business? She flinched slightly, the truth of my words clearly hitting home. I could have supported you. You could have, I agreed, but you made different choices. Walking into my grandmother's formal dining room felt surreal. The space was unchanged from my childhood, the same antique mahogany table that seated 20, the same ancestral portraits watching from the walls, the same sterling silver place settings gleaming under the chandelier. But the family dynamics had shifted irrevocably. I was no longer the poor relative they pitied and dismissed. I was the CEO who had just outmaneuvered them on a deal they had pursued for years. The CEO whose company was now worth more than many of their individual portfolios. The CEO who had built something meaningful while they weren't watching. As we took our seats, my grandmother surveyed the table, her eyes finally resting on me. It seems, she said with the faintest hint of a smile, that we have much to discuss about the future of the family's investments. If you've ever been called poor for choosing purpose over prestige, hit that subscribe button because Eliza's story isn't over, and the next family dinner will reveal even more surprising turns that you won't want to miss. We certainly do, I replied, unfolding my napkin and meeting her gaze directly. Starting with a new understanding of what actually constitutes value. The dinner that followed was unlike any family gathering I could remember. For the first time, they were asking about my work, tentatively at first, then with increasing interest as they realized the scale of what I'd built. But how did you finance the growth? Bradley asked, his fork suspended midway to his mouth. The trust fund wouldn't have been enough for acquisitions of this size. We started small and proved our model, I explained. When our first projects demonstrated both social impact and financial returns, impact investors took notice. Our capital raises have been oversubscribed for the past 3 years. Impact investors, Uncle Richard repeated skeptically. Those returns can't compare to traditional models. Our investors saw 31% returns last year, I replied calmly, while maintaining affordability for residents and creating community wealth. The old zero-sum approach to real estate, where developer profits must come at the expense of community affordability, is outdated. We've proven there's a better way. My grandmother, who rarely revealed her thoughts, studied me with newfound interest. You've built something substantial, Eliza, something your grandfather might have appreciated. It was the closest thing to approval I'd ever received from her, and despite years of telling myself I didn't need it, the words settled something deep within me. Thank you, grandmother, I said simply. As dessert was served, my phone lit up, with notifications. The press release had gone public. Lakefront Towers was officially, publicly part of Horizon's portfolio. Within minutes, congratulatory messages began flooding in from partners, investors, and community organizations. Bradley's phone buzzed as well. His expression darkened as he read the screen. The Business Journal just published the story, he muttered to his father. They're calling it a visionary acquisition that will transform Chicago's waterfront approach. Uncle Richard's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The narrative was already taking shape, and it wasn't the one the Winters family was accustomed to controlling. After dinner, as the family moved to the library for coffee, my grandmother beckoned me to walk with her. She moved slowly now, leaning on an elegant ebony cane, but her mind remained as sharp as ever. You kept secrets, she observed when we were out of earshot of the others. I learned from this family, I replied. Results speak louder than explanations. She nodded slightly. Your grandfather would have understood your approach, though Richard never has. Edward believed development should serve communities, not just extract from them. I looked at her in surprise. This was not the family narrative I'd grown up with. Why do you think he left such detailed provisions in his will? She continued. He wanted to ensure the family's wealth didn't become divorced from its responsibility to the communities where that wealth was generated. Richard has interpreted those provisions differently than Edward intended. We reached the library doors and paused. Inside, I could see my family members on their phones, undoubtedly reading the breaking news about Lakefront Towers and trying to assess what it meant for the family's standing. I'm curious to see what you'll do next, my grandmother said, fixing me with her clear gaze. Now that you've gotten everyone's attention. I smiled slightly. I'm just getting started, grandmother. Horizon is redefining what's possible in urban development. The question isn't what I'll do next, it's whether the Winters family will continue clinging to outdated approaches while the industry evolves around them. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded almost imperceptibly. You might be a Winters after all, she said quietly, before entering the library. I remained in the doorway for a moment, watching my family. They had gathered around tablets and phones, examining Horizon's website, reading press coverage, finally seeing what I'd built while they weren't looking. For years, I'd been dismissed as the poor relation, the idealistic one who had thrown away her birthright for a naive dream. Now, they were confronted with the reality that I had created something more innovative, more impactful, and potentially more valuable than their carefully protected portfolios. I straightened my shoulders and stepped into the library. The family conversation abruptly halted. So, Uncle Richard said, his voice strained but attempting reconciliation, it seems congratulations are in order, Eliza. Lakefront Towers is quite an acquisition. Thank you, I replied simply. It's an important step in Horizon's growth. Strategy. Perhaps, he suggested, we should discuss how Winters Capital might participate in future Horizon projects. Family resources could help you scale more quickly. I smiled slightly. The pivot from dismissal to attempted partnership was happening even faster than I'd anticipated. That's an interesting proposal. Though any potential partners would need to fully embrace our development philosophy. Mixed income, community ownership, and genuine affordability. Does that align with the Winters investment approach? Uncle Richard frowned slightly. Our primary responsibility is to maximize returns for the family portfolio. And that, I said, is why we might struggle to collaborate. Horizon believes maximizing community benefit leads to superior returns. It's a fundamentally different starting point. My phone chimed with another notification. Maya had texted that our major investment partner wanted to accelerate funding for our next 3 developments based on the positive reception to the Lakefront Towers announcement. Excuse me, I said, stepping away from the group to return the call. As I moved to a quiet corner of the library, I heard Bradley whisper to Vanessa, "How did we not see this coming? How did Eliza build a major development company right under our noses?" Because, Vanessa replied quietly, no one ever bothered to actually look at what she was doing. Uncle Richard said she was playing with houses in poor neighborhoods, and we all just accepted it. Their words confirmed what I had always known. They had underestimated me because they had never questioned their assumptions about what constituted real success, real value, real impact. They had been so certain of their superiority that they never bothered to truly see me at all. And in their blindness, they had missed the emergence of a new approach to real estate development, one that was increasingly being recognized as the future of the industry. While they had been protecting the status quo, I had been building something revolutionary. The poor relation had just redefined what wealth could mean, and this was only the beginning. As coffee was served in my grandmother's library, a text from Maya confirmed our next steps. Media requests flooding in, Chicago Tribune, Bloomberg, and CNBC want interviews about the Lakefront Towers acquisition and our mixed-income model. Also, community partners are thrilled. When do you want to schedule the neighborhood announcement? I smiled slightly, typing a quick response before returning my attention to the family gathering. The contrast couldn't have been more striking. Here, in this wood-paneled library with its first editions and ancestral portraits, my relatives were scrambling to understand a business model that centered on community empowerment and equitable development. I still don't understand, Bradley persisted, his voice edged with frustration. How does setting aside 30% of Lakefront Towers for affordable housing make financial sense? The margins on luxury units are what make these developments profitable. That's the outdated thinking that kept you from securing the property. In the first place, I replied, setting down my coffee cup, when you integrate affordable and market-rate housing thoughtfully, with community-owned commercial spaces that generate revenue for resident services, the overall value of the development increases. Our investors see both financial returns and social impact. Investors don't care about social impact, Uncle Richard interjected. They care about ROI. That might have been true 20 years ago, I countered. Today, the most sophisticated investors understand that developments that address actual community needs create sustainable value. Our waitlist of investors has grown every quarter for 3 years. I pulled out my tablet and opened our investor dashboard, displaying performance metrics that told a clear story. Horizon's developments consistently outperformed traditional luxury-only approaches in long-term value creation, occupancy rates, and return on investment. Uncle Richard adjusted his glasses, leaning forward despite himself. The numbers were undeniable, even to someone who had built his career on conventional development models. This is unexpected, he admitted reluctantly. For you, perhaps, I said, but the real estate industry has been moving in this direction for years. While Winters Capital has been pursuing the same luxury developments that worked in the 1990s, companies like Horizon have been pioneering approaches that address today's actual housing needs. My mother, who had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout the evening, finally spoke. Why didn't you come to the family with this? We could have supported you, invested alongside you. Would you have? I asked, meeting her eyes directly. When I first pitched a mixed-income approach at a family meeting 5 years ago, Uncle Richard called it charity work disguised as business. Bradley said I'd caught the social justice bug at college. You all laughed and moved on to discussing yacht investments. The memory hung in the air between us. No one disputed its accuracy. That was before you had proven the model, my mother offered weakly. Someone had to believe in it before it was proven, I replied. I found partners who did. None of them were named Winters. The library doors opened as Margaret appeared with a silver tray of digestives. Mrs. Winters, she addressed my grandmother. Mr. Crawford from the mayor's office is on the line. He says it's regarding tomorrow's announcement about Lakefront Towers. My grandmother raised an eyebrow, looking at me. It seems you've been quite busy, Eliza. The mayor's office has been a strong supporter of our development approach, I explained. Their affordable housing initiatives align perfectly with our model. The mayor supports this? Bradley asked incredulously. Richard's been trying to get a meeting with her office about Lakefront Towers for months. Because your proposal offered nothing the city actually needs, I pointed out. More luxury condos for international investors who leave them empty half the year? The city is facing an affordable housing crisis. Our plan addresses that while still delivering premium units and strong returns. My phone lit up with another notification. The Chicago Tribune had just published their story on the acquisition. I opened the link and turned my tablet toward the family. Revolutionary approach to luxury development. How Eliza Winters and Horizon Properties are redefining Chicago's skyline. The headline hovered in the air like a challenge to everything the Winters family had built its reputation upon. The article detailed Horizon's innovative approach, highlighted our history of successful mixed-income developments, and quoted the mayor calling Lakefront Towers a model for the future of urban development. Uncle Richard snatched the tablet, reading, with increasing disbelief, "This makes it sound like you're reinventing real estate development." "In many ways, we are," I replied calmly. "The old approach, luxury developments that ignore community needs and drive displacement, is increasingly untenable, both politically and financially. Horizon has proven there's a better way forward." "This is a PR piece," he scoffed, though his voice lacked conviction. "The real measure is financial performance." I reached for the tablet and opened our financial dashboard. Last quarter's returns across our portfolio. Compare them to any traditional luxury development. The numbers spoke for themselves. 28% average returns, with our mixed-income properties outperforming luxury-only developments in both short-term yields and long-term appreciation. The room fell silent as my family confronted evidence that contradicted everything they thought they knew about real estate development and about me. "There must be subsidies, tax incentives," Bradley began, grasping for explanations that would preserve his worldview. "We utilize every available program," I acknowledged, "just like every smart developer does. The difference is that we've built genuine relationships with communities, local governments, and impact investors who understand that addressing the affordable housing crisis creates value for everyone involved." My grandmother, who had been observing the conversation with sharp attention, finally spoke. "This approach, creating developments that serve multiple income levels, it's not entirely new, is it? Your grandfather experimented with similar models in the 60s before the family focused exclusively on luxury properties." Her words surprised me. The family narrative had always centered on the Winters' ascension to luxury development as a mark of success, not as a departure from more inclusive approaches. "I wasn't aware of that," I admitted. "Edward believed development should strengthen communities, not just extract value from locations," she continued, her voice taking on a reminiscent quality rarely heard in family gatherings. "Richard steered us in a different direction after he took control of the real estate division." Uncle Richard shifted uncomfortably. "The luxury market offered better returns, Mother. The family portfolio benefited tremendously from that pivot." "Perhaps," my grandmother said, her eyes still on me. "But I wonder what we lost in the process." The question hung in the air, bridging decades of family history and challenging the measures of success that had defined the Winters legacy. My phone chimed again. Maya was calling. "Excuse me," I said, stepping toward the windows overlooking Lake Michigan's dark expanse. "I need to take this." "We just got word that Architectural Digest wants to feature Lakefront Towers as their cover story once the redesign is complete," Maya reported excitedly. "They're particularly interested in how we're integrating affordable units without compromising design quality." "That's perfect," I replied, aware of my family listening intently behind me. "Schedule the interview, but make sure they understand. Our focus on community integration, not just aesthetics. This isn't about creating separate spaces for different income levels. It's about building a cohesive community." As I ended the call, I turned to find my family watching me with expressions ranging from confusion to reluctant admiration. For the first time in my adult life, they were seeing me, really seeing me, not as the poor relation who had rejected their path, but as someone who had created a new one entirely. "Architectural Digest," Vanessa remarked, her tone revealing how thoroughly this shifted her perception of my work. "That's impressive." "The design is just one element," I replied. "What makes our development successful is the intentional creation of community. Beautiful spaces that bring people together across income levels, that give residents ownership stakes in commercial areas, that prioritize sustainability and long-term value creation. And this approach? This has made you wealthy? Uncle Richard asked bluntly, still struggling to reconcile his preconceptions with the evidence before him. I laughed softly. If you're asking about my personal finances, Uncle Richard, I'm doing quite well. But that was never the point. Wealth that comes at the expense of communities isn't sustainable, morally or financially. Horizon has proven we can create financial value by addressing real community needs. Bradley was scrolling through his phone, his expression growing increasingly troubled. The Tribune article mentions a portfolio of 15 major developments across 5 states. Is that accurate? 17 now, with Lakefront Towers and the Detroit Riverfront project we acquired last month. I corrected. Horizon has grown significantly in the past 2 years. All these years, my mother said quietly. When we thought you were struggling with your little real estate venture, you were building an empire. Not an empire, I corrected. A company with purpose. There's a difference. Purpose doesn't pay dividends, Uncle Richard muttered, though with notably less conviction than he would have expressed hours earlier. Our dividends last quarter suggest otherwise, I replied evenly. Purpose and profit aren't opposing forces. Uncle Richard, when approached thoughtfully, they reinforce each other. My grandmother's assistant appeared at the doorway again. Ms. Winters, there's a call from the Chicago Housing Coalition. They're requesting a meeting regarding community benefits at Lakefront Towers. Tell them I'll call back first thing tomorrow, I replied. We're committed to honoring the community benefits agreement we discussed during preliminary planning. As Margaret left, Uncle Richard leaned forward. Community benefits agreement? What exactly have you promised? Local hiring requirements, minority contractor set-asides, community-owned retail spaces, and a percentage of units reserved for neighborhood residents at risk of displacement, I listed. All elements that create genuine value and community buy-in, which ultimately protects our investment and ensures long-term success. Those concessions cut into profits, he argued. Those investments enhance returns, I corrected. Our developments, with the strongest community benefits, agreements have the highest occupancy rates, the lowest turnover, and the strongest appreciation. The data is clear. I opened another document on my tablet, a side-by-side comparison of traditional luxury developments versus Horizon's integrated approach. 5-year performance metrics showed our model consistently outperforming conventional approaches. This is, Bradley began, then stopped, clearly struggling to reconcile the evidence with his deeply held beliefs about real estate development. It's the future, I said simply. The question is whether the Winters family will participate in that future or continue clinging to outdated approaches. The library fell silent as my family grappled with a fundamental challenge to their understanding of both business and my place within the family hierarchy. For years, they had defined success in narrow terms that excluded my vision. Now they were confronted with undeniable evidence that the path they had dismissed might actually represent the way forward. My grandmother's voice broke the silence. I believe, she said slowly, that we have much to learn from Eliza's approach. The quarterly returns are compelling. Coming from her, the family's ultimate arbiter of what constituted success, these words carried immense weight. The atmosphere in the room shifted subtly, a collective recalibration as the family processed this implicit endorsement. Uncle Richard cleared his throat. Perhaps, Eliza, you might consider a presentation at the next family investment meeting. A more formal overview of your business model. The invitation represented a seismic shift in my standing within the family. From being dismissed as the poor relation playing at real estate, I was now being asked to educate them on my approach. I'd be happy to, I replied, careful to keep my tone neutral despite the vindication flooding through me. Though I should note that Horizon's approach isn't simply a business model, it's a fundamentally different philosophy about the purpose of development and the relationship between profit and community welfare. Profit remains the ultimate measure, Uncle Richard insisted, though his tone had lost its dismissive edge. For traditional developers, perhaps, I acknowledged. But the most innovative investors now recognize that developments that solve genuine community problems create the most sustainable value. That's why our investor waitlist continues to grow. People want to be part of what we're building, both financially and philosophically. My phone lit up with another message, the mayor's office confirming tomorrow's joint announcement about the community benefits package associated with the Lakefront Towers acquisition. You've certainly made connections, Bradley observed, a note of envy evident in his voice. The mayor, community organizations, impact investors, people who wouldn't return my calls? Because your approach offered nothing they needed, I pointed out. Development doesn't happen in a vacuum, Bradley. When you engage genuinely with community needs, doors open. The family gathering had extended far beyond its usual duration, the typical swift progression of financial updates, and dismissive commentary replaced by a searching examination of what I had built while they weren't watching. As the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 11, my grandmother rose from her chair, signaling the evening's end. We have much to consider, she announced. Eliza has presented us with a different vision for development than the one this family has pursued for decades. The results speak for themselves. Coming from her, a woman who had witnessed the family's evolution from my grandfather's initial real estate ventures to the current portfolio of luxury properties, these words carried profound significance. I'll have my assistant send over the full Horizon portfolio overview, I offered. The numbers tell an important story, but what truly matters is the impact our developments have on the communities they serve. That's something best experienced firsthand. Firsthand? My mother echoed. I'm hosting a community open house at our South Shore development next weekend, I explained. Local residents, business owners, investors, and city officials will be there to discuss our approach and tour the completed project. You're all welcome to attend. The invitation hung in the air. Not just an offer to visit a property, but an opportunity to witness a fundamentally different approach to development than the one the family had pursued for decades. I'd like to see it, my grandmother said, unexpectedly. This, community-centered approach you've pioneered. Uncle Richard looked startled. Mother, I'm not sure that neighborhood is what, Richard? She interrupted sharply. Is not the type of area where Winters family members typically invest. Perhaps that's precisely why we should see it. The rebuke was gentle but unmistakable. For the first time in my memory, my grandmother was questioning the investment philosophy that had guided the family for decades. As the gathering dispersed, my mother lingered beside me, her expression complex. I should have paid more attention to what you were building, she said quietly, instead of accepting Richard's assessment. Yes, I agreed, not softening the truth to ease her discomfort. You should have. I'm proud of you, Eliza, she continued. What you've created. It's remarkable. Thank you, I replied, meeting her eyes directly. But I didn't build Horizon to make the family proud. I built it because I believed there was a better way to approach development, one that creates value for everyone involved, not just wealthy investors. And you've proven that approach works, she acknowledged, financially and otherwise. The financial success is a byproduct, I explained. What drives our growth is addressing genuine community needs while creating beautiful, sustainable spaces where people across income levels can thrive together. She hesitated, then asked the question that clearly troubled her most. Why didn't you tell me? All these years, when the family assumed you were struggling. Would you have understood? I asked simply. Or would you have pressed me? To join forces with Uncle Richard? To adapt my vision to fit the Winters model? Her silence was answer enough. As the family members gathered their belongings and prepared to depart, I stepped onto the terrace overlooking Lake Michigan. The night was clear, the Chicago skyline glittering in the distance, a cityscape my company was now actively reshaping. Bradley joined me unexpectedly, his expression more thoughtful than I had ever seen it. "I underestimated you," he admitted, the words clearly difficult for him. We all did. "Yes," I agreed simply. "The Lakefront Towers acquisition, that was my project for 3 years," he continued. "I never even knew Horizon was in the picture." "How did you manage that?" "We approached it differently," I explained. "While you were focusing exclusively on the luxury potential and fighting with community organizations over affordability requirements, we engaged those same organizations as partners. We understood that community support was essential to the project's success, not an obstacle to overcome." He was silent for a moment, processing this fundamentally different approach. "And that made the difference? That and our track record of successful mixed-income developments," I replied. "The sellers wanted certainty that the project would move forward without years of community opposition. Our model provided that certainty." "I never considered that approach," he admitted. "The Winters investment philosophy doesn't allow for it," I observed. "The family has always viewed development as something done to communities, not with them. That perspective is increasingly out of step with both market realities and social needs." Bradley leaned against the terrace railing, looking out at the city lights. "Everything I thought I knew about development, about what constitutes success. In this industry, you've challenged all of it tonight." "Good," I said quietly. "The old approaches aren't working anymore, Bradley. They're creating cities where teachers can't afford to live near their schools, where essential workers commute hours each day, where neighborhoods are hollowed out by luxury developments that sit half empty. There's a better way forward." He was silent for a long moment, then turned to face me directly. "Would you consider... would there be an opportunity to learn more about Horizon's approach? Not as a Winters representative, but personally?" The request surprised me, a genuine expression of interest from the cousin who had dismissed my work for years. "We're always looking for people who are willing to unlearn outdated approaches and embrace a more inclusive vision of development," I replied carefully. "It requires a fundamental shift in perspective." "I'm beginning to see that," he acknowledged. "Tonight has been eye-opening." As we stood there on the terrace, the power dynamics that had defined our relationship since childhood had irrevocably shifted. The cousin who had once mocked my little real estate hobby was now asking to learn from my approach. The family that had dismissed me as the poor relation was now confronting the possibility that I had identified the future of the industry before they had. My phone chimed with another message from Maya. Our community partners were celebrating the Lakefront Towers announcement with an impromptu gathering at our South Shore development. "They're asking if you can stop by," she wrote. "Everyone wants to toast to what this means for the city's affordable housing landscape." "I need to go," I told Bradley, showing him the message. "Our community partners are celebrating the Lakefront Towers announcement." "Community partners," he repeated, the concept clearly still foreign to him. "Residents, local businesses, organizations, they're all invested in the project's success." "They're the reason for its success," I corrected gently. "Development works best when it addresses real community needs, not just investor desires." As I prepared to leave, my grandmother appeared at the terrace doorway, her slight figure silhouetted against the library lights. "Leaving so soon, Eliza?" she asked. "Our community partners are hosting a celebration for the Lakefront Towers." "Announcement," I explained. "I should make an appearance." "Community celebrations at this hour?" Uncle Richard remarked, appearing behind my grandmother, his tone suggesting such events were beneath the family's dignity. "Real community doesn't operate on a 9-to-5 schedule, Uncle Richard," I replied. "These are the people who will make Lakefront Towers successful. Local entrepreneurs who will open businesses in the commercial spaces, community organizations that will provide services to residents, neighbors who supported our vision through the approval process. Their celebration matters more than any investor cocktail party. My grandmother studied me thoughtfully. You've created something quite different from the Winters approach, haven't you, Eliza? I've created something I believe in, I replied. Simply. A development model that addresses real housing needs while delivering strong returns. The fact that it differs from the family's approach is secondary to its effectiveness. The results are compelling, she acknowledged, using the highest praise in her limited emotional vocabulary. Perhaps there's room for both approaches within the family portfolio. Coming from her, the guardian of family tradition, this represented a seismic shift. For the first time, she was acknowledging that the path I had chosen might have validity alongside the family's established approach. I'd be happy to discuss potential collaboration, I replied carefully. Though any partnership would need to honor Horizon's core principles about community engagement and affordable housing integration. Principles and profits, Uncle Richard muttered, though with notably less dismissiveness than he would have expressed hours earlier. They're not mutually exclusive, I pointed out. Quite the opposite, in fact. Our principled approach is precisely why our profits outperform traditional models. As I prepared to depart, collecting my coat and bag, I was struck by how dramatically the evening had diverged from the familiar pattern of family gatherings. For the first time, I had attended not as the poor relation seeking approval, but as a successful CEO whose approach challenged everything the family thought they knew about real estate development. The Lakefront Towers acquisition had forced them to see me, really see me, perhaps for the first time. The poor relation they had dismissed for years had built something innovative, successful, and increasingly influential in the industry they thought they understood. I'll send the portfolio overview tomorrow, I told my grandmother as I kissed her cheek goodbye. And the invitation to our community open house next weekend stands. It would be illuminating for the family to see firsthand what we've created. I believe I'll attend, she replied, surprising me once again. It's time I understood this new approach you've pioneered. As I walked toward the front door, I passed the grand staircase with its parade of family portraits, generations, of Winters' wealth captured in oil and gilt frames. For years, my absence from those images had symbolized my outsider status, my rejection of the family path. Now, that absence felt like freedom, the space to create something new, something that honored my vision rather than family tradition. I had built Horizon not to earn a place on that wall, but to prove there were other walls worth building, ones that welcomed more people, that created community rather than exclusivity. Tomorrow's newspapers would announce the Lakefront Towers, acquisition to the world. The family that had called me poor would wake up to headlines celebrating my company's vision for the future of urban development. The real estate contract they never saw coming had changed everything. Not just my standing in the family, but potentially the family's understanding of what development could and should accomplish. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I smiled at the thought of what was yet to come. The poor relation had just begun to show her true worth. The weeks following the Lakefront Towers announcement transformed everything. My calendar filled with media interviews, investor meetings, and community engagement sessions. Each morning brought new press coverage, not just of the acquisition itself, but of Horizon's revolutionary approach to development. Redefining luxury, how Eliza Winters bridged the affordability gap. Without sacrificing quality, read the Architectural Digest headline. The new face of urban development, Horizon Properties shows how profit and purpose can coexist, declared the Wall Street Journal. From family outcast to industry. Visionary, the unconventional journey of Eliza Winters, proclaimed Chicago Magazine, complete with a profile that detailed my departure from family tradition to chart a new course in real estate. That last one had particularly irritated Uncle Richard, who called to complain about the portrayal of the family. They make it sound like we rejected you, he grumbled, as if the Winters didn't support your endeavors. Didn't you? I asked simply. When was the last time, before the Lakefront Towers announcement, that anyone in the family expressed genuine interest in my work? His silence was answer enough. Today marked another milestone, the formal community open house at our South Shore development, the project that had launched Horizon's growth 5 years ago. What had begun as a renovation of abandoned buildings had evolved into a thriving mixed-income community with affordable apartments, market-rate condos, resident-owned businesses, and community spaces that had transformed the neighborhood. I arrived early to walk the property before visitors arrived. The morning sun illuminated the courtyard where community gardens flourished between renovated brick buildings. Children played in the central playground, while residents gathered at the community-owned cafe, the business that had anchored the commercial revival of the block. "Ms. Winters," called Mrs. Johnson, the 73-year-old community leader who had initially viewed our project with skepticism, but had become one of our strongest advocates. "The youth center looks wonderful with the new mural." I joined her in admiring the artwork created by local teenagers, a vibrant depiction of the neighborhood's past, present, and future, spanning the entire side of the renovated community center. "Their vision for this community is so powerful," I replied. "That's why resident input has been central to every phase of development." "Unlike those developers who tried before you," she nodded, "coming in with their plans already drawn up, telling us what our neighborhood needed without ever asking. That approach never works," I agreed. "Communities know better than any developer what will help them thrive." As we walked, Mrs. Johnson updated me on the Neighborhood Council's latest initiatives, a workforce development program operating from our commercial spaces, a community land trust expanding to adjacent blocks, a resident-led sustainability project that had reduced energy costs throughout the development. "None of this would have happened with traditional development," she observed. "They would have built luxury condos, priced everyone out, and called it neighborhood improvement." "That's exactly why we created a different model," I explained. "Development should strengthen existing communities, not displace them." As we rounded the corner, I noticed a familiar town car parked at the entrance. My grandmother had arrived, accompanied by Uncle Richard, Bradley, and to my surprise, my mother and sister. "Your family actually came," Mrs. Johnson remarked, recognizing them from news coverage of the Lakefront Towers announcement. "This should be interesting." I greeted them as they emerged from the car, noting their expressions as they surveyed the development. My grandmother's face remained impassive, though her eyes moved thoughtfully over the buildings and gardens. Uncle Richard's skepticism was evident in his tight posture and narrowed gaze. Bradley looked genuinely curious, while my mother and Vanessa seemed uncertain what to make of their surroundings. "Welcome to Horizon South Shore," I said, extending my hand to my grandmother first, as family protocol dictated. "I'm glad you could make it." "We were intrigued by your invitation," she replied, her voice revealing nothing of her impressions. "This is not what I expected." "That's precisely why I wanted you to see it," I explained. "Most people's preconceptions about mixed-income housing don't match the reality we've created." I introduced Mrs. Johnson, watching with interest as my family adjusted to meeting someone they would typically encounter only as service staff, never as a community partner central to a development's success. Mrs. Johnson was instrumental in shaping this project, I explained. Her insights guided everything from unit layouts to community space programming. "Residents helped design the buildings?" Uncle Richard asked, making little effort to hide his skepticism. "Residents help design the community," Mrs. Johnson corrected firmly, "because we're the ones who live here, not just investors collecting checks from far away." Uncle Richard looked taken aback by her directness, while my grandmother's expression shifted to one of subtle interest. "Perhaps you could show us around," she suggested, surprising me with her willingness to engage. I'd like to understand this approach that has garnered so much attention. The tour that followed challenged everything my family thought they knew about affordable housing and community development. We visited beautifully designed apartments available at below-market rates for essential workers, market-rate condos purchased by young professionals attracted to the community's vibrancy, commercial spaces owned cooperatively by residents who had become entrepreneurs through Horizon's Business Incubator program. Throughout the tour, we encountered residents who greeted me by name, sharing updates on their lives and businesses. The genuine relationships clearly surprised my family, who were accustomed to developments where investors and residents occupied entirely separate worlds. "You know everyone," my mother observed as we walked through the community garden where residents grew produce for their families and the local farmers market. "Not everyone," I corrected, "but relationships are central to our development philosophy. We're not just building structures, we're helping cultivate community." "It's all very idealistic," Uncle Richard remarked, though with less dismissiveness than I expected. "But the financial performance must suffer from all these community benefits." I smiled, having anticipated this concern. "Our financial overview is set up in the community center. The numbers speak for themselves. In the light-filled space that served as a gathering place, classroom, and event venue, I had arranged displays detailing the development's financial performance. Charts and graphs showed occupancy rates, property value appreciation, commercial space revenue, and overall returns that consistently outperformed traditional developments. "This is unexpected," Bradley admitted, studying the figures closely. 97% occupancy? In this market? "People stay when they feel invested in a community," I explained. "Our tenant turnover is 60% lower than comparable developments, which significantly reduces costs. And our commercial spaces have waiting lists because the businesses here serve real neighborhood needs, not just luxury desires." My grandmother moved slowly through the displays, her expression thoughtful. "These returns are impressive," she acknowledged, "particularly given the affordability component." "The affordability component is precisely why the returns are strong," I pointed out. "By creating genuine community where people across income levels can thrive together, we've built something sustainable, financially and socially." As we continued the tour, other visitors began arriving for the open house: community members, city officials, investors, journalists, and curious onlookers drawn by the recent press coverage. The atmosphere grew lively as residents proudly showed off their community to newcomers. "Ms. Winters," called a familiar voice. Maya approached with a tablet in hand, her expression excited. "The mayor just confirmed for the Lakefront Towers groundbreaking next month, and the waiting list for investor participation in our next round has grown again. We're now 3 times oversubscribed." I introduced Maya to my family, watching their expressions as they realized that my CFO was not only remarkably young, but also from the South Shore community itself, someone who had risen through Horizon's mentorship program to become a key executive. "Maya joined us as an intern from the local high school," I explained. "Her financial acumen quickly became evident, and she's been instrumental in developing our unique funding models. The ones that have outperformed traditional approaches by 32%, Maya added with a smile that didn't quite hide her satisfaction at the family's surprised expressions. As Maya walked away to greet other guests, Uncle Richard cleared his throat. "Your team is not what I expected." "Horizon believes talent exists everywhere," I replied. "Not just in elite universities or established firms. Our team reflects the communities we serve, which gives us insights traditional developers miss." "It's all very progressive," he remarked, the word sounding almost like an accusation. "It's pragmatic," I corrected. "Diverse perspectives lead to better decisions and stronger results. Our performance proves it." As the open house officially began, I was pulled away to speak with city officials and potential investors, leaving my family to explore on their own. Throughout the afternoon, I glimpsed them in conversation with residents, examining the development's features and, most tellingly, taking notes. Several hours later, as the event wound down, I found my grandmother seated in the community garden, observing a group of children playing on the newly installed playground equipment. "What do you think?" I asked, joining her on the bench. She was silent for a moment, her gaze still on the children. "It's not what the Winters family has traditionally built," she finally said. "No," I agreed. "It's something better." "Perhaps," she acknowledged, surprising me. "Your grandfather would have appreciated what you've created here, Eliza." Before Richard steered our development approach toward exclusively luxury projects, Edward believed in building communities that served people across income levels. This revelation of family history contradicted everything I'd been told about the Winters development philosophy. I never knew that. "There's much about our family history that has been selectively presented," she replied. "The narrative of exclusive luxury as the only worthy pursuit is relatively recent. Edward understood that sustainable development required meeting genuine community needs." She turned to face me directly, her expression more open than I could remember seeing it. "You've reclaimed something of his vision, though you've taken it much further than even he imagined." Coming from her, the keeper of family tradition, this was extraordinary praise. "Thank you, grandmother," I said simply. "The family has much to learn from your approach," she continued. "The results are undeniable, both financially and otherwise." Before I could respond, Bradley approached, his expression thoughtful. "The resident-owned businesses, that's an innovative model. The commercial spaces generate returns for both the development and the community entrepreneurs. It creates a virtuous cycle," I explained. "Residents build equity through business, ownership while providing services the community needs. The development benefits from commercial occupancy and increased property values. Everyone wins." "It challenges everything I learned at Wharton," he admitted. "This collaborative approach versus the traditional extractive model." He hesitated, then added, "I'd like to understand it better." Coming from Bradley, who had dismissed my work for years, this represented a significant shift. "We're offering a workshop series on our development approach next month," I told him. "You'd be welcome to attend." "I'd like that," he replied, surprising me with his sincerity. As the open house concluded and guests began departing, my family gathered near the entrance. Their expressions had shifted notably from the skepticism they'd arrived with, not completely convinced, perhaps, but undeniably impacted by what they'd seen. "This has been educational," Uncle Richard acknowledged stiffly. "Your approach is unorthodox, but the results are difficult." 6 months after the Lakefront Towers announcement, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office in the Palmer Building watching the spring rain wash over Chicago. Below, construction crews worked steadily at the Lakefront Towers site, the development that had changed everything, not just for me, but potentially for urban housing across the Midwest. The headline in that morning's Chicago Tribune business section sat on my desk. "Horizon Properties expands revolutionary housing model to 5 new cities." The article detailed our expansion into Detroit, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, Cleveland, and Cincinnati, bringing our community-centered development approach to urban areas hungry for innovative solutions to their housing challenges. Maya entered with a coffee and the morning's briefing materials. "The mayor of Cincinnati called. She wants to discuss the riverfront project personally, and the investment round closed yesterday. $500 million raised, double our initial target." I smiled, remembering when we'd celebrated securing our first million in funding 5 years ago. "What about the Community Land Trust proposal for the West Side project?" "The Neighborhood Council voted unanimously to partner with us," Maya reported. "They were particularly impressed by the resident ownership pathways, Their representative said, and I quote, "Horizon is showing what development should have been doing all along." As Maya departed, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. From being dismissed as the poor relation playing at real estate to running a company that was actively reshaping urban development across the Midwest. The transition had been swift and, to my family, shocking. My intercom buzzed. "Your grandmother is here to see you," my assistant announced. "Send her in," I replied, surprised by the unscheduled visit. My grandmother entered slowly, leaning lightly on her cane. At 90, she remained remarkably sharp, her posture still regal despite her age. She had never before visited my office, a symbolic threshold crossing that wasn't lost on either of us. "Grandmother," I greeted her, moving to help her to a chair. "This is unexpected." "I've been following your progress," she said, gesturing to the Tribune article on my desk. 5 new cities. Edward would have been proud. I smiled at the mention of my grandfather. Since the South Shore open house, my grandmother had shared more about his original vision for Winters developments, one that had been overshadowed by Uncle Richard's pivot to luxury-only properties. "Thank you," I replied, simply. "The model is proving scalable in ways we'd hoped, but couldn't be certain of until now." She nodded, her gaze moving around my office, taking in the modern design with its community-focused artwork, pieces created by residents of our developments that told stories of neighborhood transformation. "I've been thinking about legacy," she said after a moment. "About what we build and what remains after we're gone." I waited, sensing there was more she wanted to say. "The Winters family has built its reputation on luxury developments that serve the few," she continued. "You've chosen a different path, one that serves many while still creating significant value." "Different priorities lead to different outcomes," I agreed. "Indeed." She reached into her handbag and withdrew a leather portfolio that I recognized immediately. It bore the embossed crest that adorned important family documents. "I've made some decisions about the future of the family's real estate holdings." She handed me the portfolio. Inside was a document titled Winters Family Trust, Real Estate Division Restructuring. As I scanned the contents, my breath caught. My grandmother had restructured the family's entire real estate division, creating a new entity called Winters Horizon Community Development, to be co-led by myself, and surprisingly, Bradley. "You're merging the family's real estate holdings with Horizon's approach?" I said, looking up from the document in astonishment. "Not merging," she corrected. "Evolving. The Winters portfolio needs the vision you've demonstrated at Horizon, and your cousin Bradley has shown unexpected interest in your methods since the South Shore tour. He's spent the past 6 months studying community-centered development approaches." This was news to me. While Bradley had attended the workshop, series I'd mentioned during the open house, I hadn't realized how deeply he'd engaged with the concepts. "Bradley has been interning with a community land trust in Bronzeville," my grandmother continued, noting my surprise. "He's been quite discreet about it, not wanting his father to know until he fully understood the model." I sat back, processing this unexpected development. The cousin who had once mocked my glorified house flipping had been secretly studying community land trusts? "Why now?" I asked my grandmother. "The results of your approach are undeniable," she replied pragmatically. "The family portfolio has underperformed compared to Horizon's for 3 consecutive quarters. Even Richard can't argue with those numbers, though he's certainly tried." I smiled slightly, imagining my uncle's resistance to this conclusion. "But it's more than financial performance," she continued, surprising me further. "What you've built serves a greater purpose while still creating value. It's a model that can endure, that should endure." Coming from her, the ultimate pragmatist, who had overseen the family's wealth for decades, this recognition of purpose beyond profit was extraordinary. "The family voted on this?" I asked, knowing how entrenched the traditional approach was among my relatives. I still control the majority of voting shares, she reminded me with a small smile, though the vote was not as divided as you might imagine. Your mother and sister supported the restructuring immediately. Bradley argued passionately for it, which surprised everyone. Even your uncle abstained rather than voting against, which is as close to support as Richard is capable of expressing. I leaned forward, studying the document more closely. The restructuring wasn't just symbolic, it represented a fundamental shift in how the family's substantial real estate holdings would be managed going forward, adopting core elements of Horizon's community-centered approach. This is significant, I said finally. It's necessary, my grandmother replied. The Winters approach needs to evolve if it's to remain relevant. Your work at Horizon has shown us a path forward that honors what development can and should be. The validation was profound, not just of my business approach, but of the values that had driven me to create Horizon in the first place. After years of being dismissed as the poor relation with impractical ideals, my vision for development was now being adopted by the very family that had once rejected it. There's one more thing, my grandmother said, reaching again into her handbag. She withdrew a small velvet box that I recognized instantly. It contained the Winters family signet ring, a piece that had been passed through generations to Mark, the family's primary business steward. This belonged to your grandfather, she said, opening the box to reveal the gold ring with its distinctive crest. Then to Richard, as head of the family's business interests. I believe it's time for it to pass to you. I stared at the ring, momentarily speechless. For generations, the Winters signet had symbolized control of the family's business empire, a position I had never sought or expected to hold. Grandmother, You don't need to decide today, she interrupted gently. The restructuring will proceed regardless. But I want you to consider what it would mean for the family's legacy to be guided by your vision going forward. She rose to leave, placing the ring box on my desk. You've proven that development can create value for many, not just wealth. For a few. That's a legacy worth building upon. After she departed, I sat for a long time looking at the ring and the restructuring documents. The poor relation who had been dismissed for years was now being asked to guide the family's business future. It was a vindication I had never sought but couldn't deny feeling. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. Community meeting about Lakefront Towers public spaces starting in 10. Residents have amazing ideas. The message grounded me, reminding me of what truly mattered in our work. While the family's recognition was meaningful, the real measure of Horizon's success was in the communities we helped create, in the lives impacted by our developments. I placed the ring box in my desk drawer and gathered my materials for the community meeting. The future of the Winters family business could wait. Right now, residents had ideas to share about their neighborhood's evolution. The community center at Lakefront Towers was packed with residents, local business owners, and neighborhood representatives. Though the development was still under construction, we had opened the community spaces early to begin building connections among future residents and the surrounding neighborhood. Ms. Winters, called Mrs. Torres, a local business owner who would be opening a cafe in the development's commercial space. We've been discussing the rooftop garden concept. The community thinks it should include an educational component for local schools. I joined the group gathered around design renderings, listening as they shared ideas for transforming the rooftop into not just a garden, but a learning space where children could understand urban agriculture and sustainability. That's brilliant, I agreed. We can incorporate classroom space into the design and partner with local schools for regular programming. The energy in the room was palpable. People from diverse backgrounds and income levels collaboratively shaping the community they would share. This was the essence of Horizon's approach. Development not as something imposed upon a neighborhood, but as a process driven by those who would call it home. As the meeting progressed, I noticed a familiar figure enter the room. Bradley stood, uncertainly at the back, observing the proceedings with evident interest. I made my way to him during a break in discussions. "Grandmother told me about your work with the Bronzeville Land Trust," I said by way of greeting. He looked momentarily embarrassed. "I wanted to understand your approach properly before discussing it with the family. The concepts? They challenge everything I was taught about development economics. Yet the results speak for themselves," I pointed out. "They do," he acknowledged. "That's why I've been studying community land trusts, cooperative ownership models, mixed-income housing, finance, all the elements that make Horizon's approach work. It's fascinating how the integrated model creates value in ways traditional development misses entirely." His genuine enthusiasm surprised me. The cousin who had once dismissed my work was now immersed in the very concepts I had championed. "Grandmother mentioned the restructuring plan," I said, "and that you'd be co-leading the new division." Bradley nodded. "If you'll agree to it. I know I have a lot to learn, but I'm committed to this approach. What you've built at Horizon, it's not just financially sound, it's meaningful in a way that luxury-only development never can be." The transformation in his perspective was remarkable. From dismissing my work as charity disguised as business, he had come to recognize the profound value, both financial and social, of community-centered development. "The family has underestimated you for years," he continued. "I've underestimated you, but what you've created here is undeniable. It's a better model, and not just because the returns are stronger. It's better because it serves a genuine purpose while creating value." Coming from Bradley, who had been groomed from childhood to view development solely through the lens of investor returns, this represented an extraordinary evolution. "What does your father think of your involvement with land trusts?" I asked, curious about Uncle Richard's reaction to his son's apparent conversion. Bradley smiled slightly. "He's processing. The idea that his son is studying cooperative ownership models with community organizers isn't exactly what he envisioned for my career. But even he can't argue with Horizon's financial performance." Before I could respond, Mrs. Torres called us over to join a discussion about local hiring practices for the development's ongoing construction and eventual commercial operations. "Bradley here is learning about community-centered development," I explained as we joined the group. "He'll be working with Horizon on integrating this approach into the broader Winters portfolio." The community members welcomed him with a warmth that clearly surprised him. For someone accustomed to the rarefied environment of high-finance boardrooms, this genuine engagement with the people actually impacted by development decisions was clearly novel. As the meeting continued, I watched Bradley engage thoughtfully with residents, asking questions and listening intently to their perspectives. The transformation from the dismissive cousin who had mocked my poor life choices to someone genuinely committed to understanding community needs was striking. When the meeting concluded 2 hours later, Bradley lingered as residents departed. "This is what's been missing from every development meeting I've ever attended," he observed. "Actual input from the people who will live and work in these spaces. That's because traditional development treats people as market demographics, not as partners in the process," I pointed out. "When you engage genuinely with community needs, you create developments that actually work, financially and socially." We walked together toward the construction site, where crews were working on the building's distinctive terrace design that would accommodate both luxury and affordable units within a cohesive architectural vision. The Winters Horizon restructuring could transform the family's entire approach to real estate, Bradley said as we surveyed the progress. "Not just individual projects, but our fundamental philosophy about what development should accomplish. That's what I've been arguing for years," I reminded him. "Development isn't just about creating assets for wealthy investors. It's about building communities where people across income levels can thrive together." He nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about what you said that night at Grandmother's, about how we've been missing opportunities because we view neighborhoods as extraction points rather than communities to invest in. You were right." The admission clearly wasn't easy for him, but it was genuine. The question now, he continued, is whether the family can truly evolve beyond decades of thinking about development solely in terms of luxury and exclusivity. Some will resist, I acknowledged. Uncle Richard isn't going to embrace community land trusts overnight. Bradley laughed. No, he's not, but the numbers are increasingly difficult to argue with. When your approach consistently outperforms traditional models quarter after quarter, even the most entrenched perspectives start to shift. As we walked back toward the parking area, I noticed a sleek black sedan waiting, the same town car that had brought my family to the South Shore open house months earlier. My grandmother sat inside, observing our conversation through the window. She's been following your work closely, Bradley explained, gesturing toward the car. Ever since the South Shore tour, she's been reevaluating everything she thought she knew about development. I raised a hand in greeting, and my grandmother nodded in acknowledgement. Her presence here, at a community meeting for a development that represented a fundamental challenge to the family's traditional approach, spoke volumes about how significantly perspectives had shifted. Will you accept? Bradley asked suddenly. The co-leadership position? The signet? I considered the question carefully. For years, I had built Horizon as an alternative to the Winters approach, a deliberate counterpoint to what I saw as an outdated and extractive model of development. Now I was being asked to bring that vision back into the family fold, to guide the very portfolio I had once rejected. I'm still processing it, I admitted. For so long, my identity has been defined by standing apart from the family approach. Now I'm being asked to help transform it from within. Bradley nodded in understanding. For what it's worth, I think Horizon's approach represents the future, not just for the Winters portfolio, but for urban development broadly. The family needs your vision if it's going to remain relevant. As we reached the car, my grandmother rolled down the window. What did you think of the community meeting? She asked Bradley. Illuminating, he replied. The resident input on commercial space programming was particularly insightful, considerations we would never have identified through market analysis alone. She nodded, then turned her attention to me. And the restructuring proposal? Have you had time to consider it? I'm still thinking it through, I answered honestly. Horizon has built its identity apart from the Winters name. There are advantages to maintaining that separation, and disadvantages to passing up the opportunity to transform the family's approach more broadly, she countered pragmatically. The Winters holdings represent significant leverage to scale your vision beyond what Horizon could achieve independently. It was a compelling point. While Horizon had grown remarkably, the family's century-old portfolio represented resources and reach that would take decades to build independently. I'll give you my decision by the end of the week, I promised. She nodded, apparently satisfied. Join me for dinner tonight. There's more to discuss about Edward's original vision for the family's developments. I think you'll find it aligns more closely with your approach than you might imagine. As the car pulled away, I found myself at a crossroads I had never anticipated. 5 years ago, I had walked away from the family business, determined to build something that reflected my values rather than their traditions. Now I was being asked to bring those values back to transform the very institution I had rejected. That evening, as I prepared for dinner with my grandmother, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this unexpected juncture. From being dismissed as the poor relation making foolish choices to being offered stewardship of the family's business future, the transformation was profound. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Maya, calling with news that couldn't wait until morning. The Detroit Riverfront project just received unanimous approval from the City Council, she reported excitedly. They specifically cited our community benefits package and affordable housing integration as setting a new standard for responsible development in the city. That's fantastic, I replied, genuinely pleased. Detroit had been particularly challenging, given the city's history of development that had often failed to serve its residents. Did they approve the community ownership component for the commercial spaces? Fully approved, with additional incentives if we exceed the proposed percentages, Maya confirmed. The council president called it a model for equitable revitalization. So after we hung up, I sat for a moment absorbing the news. Horizon's approach was gaining momentum not just in Chicago but across the Midwest. City councils, community organizations, and investors increasingly recognizing the value of development that served broader needs while delivering strong returns. As I drove to my grandmother's home for dinner, I passed several Winters developments, luxury high-rises and exclusive enclaves that had defined the family's approach for decades. I tried to envision how these properties might evolve under the restructured Winters Horizon model, how exclusive spaces might become more inclusive without sacrificing quality or returns. My grandmother's chef had prepared a simple but elegant meal. As we dined in her private study rather than the formal dining room, a choice that signaled the personal nature of our conversation, she shared stories about my grandfather that had never been part of the family narrative. Edward believed development should strengthen existing communities, not replace them, she explained, showing me original plans from the 1960s for Winters developments that included affordable units, community spaces, and local business incubation. The exclusive luxury approach came later, under Richard's influence, when maximizing short-term returns became the priority. The documents revealed a family history I had never known, one where my grandfather's original vision aligned remarkably with what I had built at Horizon, albeit with 21st-century innovations. "Why are you sharing this now?" I asked, curious about the timing of these revelations. "Because the family is at a crossroads," she replied frankly. "The approach Richard championed is increasingly at odds with both market realities and social needs. Your success at Horizon has demonstrated a viable alternative, one that honors Edward's original vision while addressing contemporary challenges." She reached across the table, her hand covering mine in a rare gesture of affection. "The poor relation, as Richard so thoughtlessly called you, has proven to be the visionary the family needs. The question now is whether you're willing to help guide the Winters legacy toward a more sustainable and inclusive future." The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. After decades of upholding family tradition, my grandmother was acknowledging the need for fundamental change and recognizing that the path I had chosen, once dismissed, now represented the way forward. As the evening concluded, she walked me to the door, pausing at the grand staircase with its timeline of family portraits. "Perhaps," she said thoughtfully, "it's time to add your image to this wall. Not as someone who followed tradition, but as someone who transformed it." I smiled, remembering how my absence from these portraits had once symbolized my outsider status. "Maybe," I agreed. "Though I'd prefer a photo that captures what we're building, not just me, but the communities we're helping create." She nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "That would be fitting. A new kind of portrait for a new chapter in the family's story." As I drove home through nighttime Chicago, the city skyline glittering with possibilities, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From being dismissed as poor, financially and in spirit, to being recognized as the visionary the family needed, the transformation was complete. Yet what mattered most wasn't the family's validation, gratifying though it was. What mattered was the communities we were building, the lives being transformed by development that prioritized people alongside profit, the proof that there was indeed a better way forward. The poor relation had not only proven her worth, she had redefined what worth truly meant, not just for herself, but potentially for the family's entire approach to building and investing in communities. Tomorrow, I would decide whether to accept the signet, whether to help guide the Winters legacy into a new era. But regardless of that choice, the impact of what we had built at Horizon would continue to grow, expanding from Chicago across the Midwest and perhaps beyond, showing that, Development could serve many while still creating value. That profit and purpose could not just coexist, but reinforce each other. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed as impractical, or called poor for choosing purpose over prestige, remember this. True worth isn't measured by others' limited perceptions. It's built through vision, persistence, and the courage to create something better than what came before. Your perceived disadvantage might actually be your greatest strength, the perspective that allows you to see opportunities others miss, to build value others cannot imagine. The journey from dismissed to visionary isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. And in that process, you might just transform not only your own path, but the very institutions that once rejected you. Your breakthrough begins when you stop seeking validation and start creating undeniable value. The contract that changes everything isn't just on paper. It's in the impact you create, the communities you build, the legacy you establish through actions, not just words. The poor relation had become the pathfinder, showing a way forward, that honored the best of the past while creating something better for the future. And that, more than any family recognition or business success, was the true measure of worth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.